The night beckons. What is it now? I must hunt soon. Greetings. That was my plan. That was my plan. I must hunt soon. Agreed. What, mortal? That was my plan. You thought of that? Very well. You thought of that? Death rages. Die. Agreed. Very well. Agreed. That was my plan. Agreed. You thought of that? Very well. That was my plan. Very well. That was my plan. What is it now? You thought of that? That was my plan. Agreed. That was my plan. You thought of that? Agreed. Very well. That was my plan. Agreed. That was my plan. I must hunt soon. Very well. You thought of that? Very well. Greetings. Agreed. What, mortal? I must hunt soon. That was my plan. Very well. Agreed. That was my plan. What, mortal? Very well. That was my plan. Agreed. You thought of that? Agreed. That was my plan. Very well. That was my plan. Agreed. Very well. Agreed. That was my plan. What is it now? Agreed. Very well. You thought of that? Agreed. That was my plan. I must hunt soon.
We're under attack!
Very well. That was my plan. Agreed. That was my plan. You thought of that? That was my plan. Very well. What is it now? That was my plan. What? What is it now? Very well. What? Mortal? Agreed. You thought of that?
We're under attack!
Greetings. Agreed.
Our allies' hero has been slain.
You thought of that? What is it now? Agreed. You thought of that? I hunger. That was my plan. Agreed. Very well. Your soul is mine. Agreed. You thought of that? That was my plan. Very well. Agreed. You thought of that? What, mortal? Greetings. Agreed.
town is being attacked!
You thought of that? Very well. That was my plan. Agreed. Very well. I must hunt soon.
We're under attack!
Greetings. What is it now? That was my plan. Agreed. I must hunt soon. That was my plan.
We're under attack!
Agreed. Very well. You thought of that? Agreed. That was my plan. Agreed. That was my plan. Die. You thought of that? Greetings. What, mortal? That was my plan. Very
Our
well.
allied town is being
Agreed.
attacked!
That was my plan. Greetings.
Your money.
Agreed. I must hunt soon. Very well. You thought of that? What, mortal? Greetings. Agreed. What, mortal?
We're under attack!
That was my plan. I hunger. Death rages. What is it now? Agreed. That was my plan. Agreed. That was my plan.
Our allied heroes have been slain!
Agreed. That was my plan. Agreed. Very well. What, mortal? That was my plan. Agreed. You did that.
Point the way.
I must hunt soon. What is it now? I must hunt soon.
We're under attack!
Plan.
Greetings, friend.
Greetings. Agreed. That was my plan. Very well. What, mortal? Greetings. Agreed. That was my plan. What, mortal? Very well. That was my plan. Greetings. Very well.
Research
That
complete!
was my plan. Agreed. That was my plan. You thought of that? I must hunt soon. Agreed. You thought of that?
Our allied town is being attacked!
What, mortal? Very well. You thought of that? That was my plan. Agreed. That was my plan. I must hunt soon. Agreed. You thought of that? Agreed. That was my plan. Agreed. I hunger. Very well. That was my plan. Greetings. You thought of that? That was my plan. Very well. Agreed. That was my plan. Agreed. That was my plan. Death rages. Very well. I hunger. I must hunt soon. Agreed. You thought of that? What, mortal?
Our allied heroes have been slain! Research complete!
Agreed. plan. You thought of that. Very well. That was my plan. You thought of that. Agreed. I hunger. Your soul is mine. That was my plan.
Our allied town is being attacked!
That was my plan. Very well. You thought of that. Very well. Agreed. Very well. That was my plan. Very well. That was my plan. You thought of that. Your soul is mine. Agreed. Very well. Agreed. You thought of that. That was my plan. What is it?
Our allies' hero has been slain!
Greetings. Die. What is it now? Very well. You thought of that.
Your man is
That was my plan. Very well. I must hunt soon. You thought of that. I hunger. What is it now? Very well. You thought of that. That was my plan. You thought of that. Very well. That was my plan. You thought of that. Very well. I must hunt soon. You thought of that. Agreed. That was my plan. Very well. What is it now? Greetings. Agreed. You thought of that? Very well. That was my plan. I must hunt soon. Agreed. That was my plan. Very
Our
well.
allies' hero has been
You thought
slain!
of that? Very well. That was my plan. What, mortal? Greetings. I must hunt soon. Agreed. What, mortal? Greetings. Very well. That was my plan. Very well. You thought of that? That was my plan. Agreed. I must hunt soon. That was my plan. Agreed. You thought of that? Greetings. Agreed. You thought of that. Very well. You thought of that? That was my plan. You thought of that?
Hello there.
What is it now? That was my plan. Very well. What? Greetings. That was my plan. Agreed. That was my plan. Very well. Agreed. That was my plan. You thought of that. That was my plan.
Our allied town is being attacked! We're under attack!
What, mortal? What is it now? Death rages.
Research complete! Our allied town is being attacked! Our allied hero has been slain!
That was my plan.
Our allied town is being attacked!
Greetings. Very well. Agreed.
Our allied hero has been slain.
You thought of that. Your soul is mine. Very well. I must
Our
hunt.
allied town is being attacked.
I hunger. That was my plan. You thought of that. That was my plan.
Our allied hero has been
What
slain.
mortal? Agreed. That was my plan. Die. Your soul is mine. You thought of that. Agreed.
Our allied
That was
town
my
is being
plan.
attacked.
Very well. That was my plan. Agreed. That was my plan. Greetings. What, mortal? You thought of that? Greetings. That was my plan. I must hunt soon. What is it now? Very well. I must hunt soon.
Our allied
What?
town is being attacked.
Greetings. Agreed. Very well.
Our allied hero has been slain. We're under attack.
I must hunt soon. What, mortal? You thought of that? Greetings. That was my plan. You thought of that?
We're under attack.
That was my plan. Must hunt soon. Agreed. You thought of that? That was my plan. What? Very well. You thought of that? Very well. You thought of that? I must hunt soon. Agreed. That was my plan. I hunger. Your soul is mine. Very well. You thought of that? Very well. Agreed. That was my plan. You thought of that? Agreed. You thought of that? Greetings. That was my plan. You thought of that? What, mortal? That was my plan. You thought of that? Very well. Agreed. Very well. You thought of that? That was my plan. Agreed. You thought of that? Agreed. Very well.
Welcome to our village.
Greetings. That was my plan. You thought of that? Death rages.
We're under attack.
I must hunt soon. Die. That was my plan. Death rages. Very well.
Your master.
Thought of that?
Our allied hero has been slain.
I hunger. Death rages. I hunger. Very well. Agreed. You thought of that? Very well. What, mortal? What is it now? Agreed. I must hunt soon. You thought of that? Greetings. That was my plan.
We're under attack.
Agreed. Very well. You thought of that? What? That was my plan. Agreed. What is it now? That was my plan. You thought of that? I must hunt soon. Greetings. Very well. That was my plan. What is it now? What? Very well. Greetings. That was my plan. You thought of that? Very well. Agreed. Very well. Agreed. Very well. That was my plan. You thought of that? That was my plan.
Our allied town is being attacked!
You thought of that? That was my plan. Very well. Agreed. I must hunt soon. Very well. That
Our
was my
allied hero
plan.
has been slain!
Very well. Greetings. What? Mortal? You thought of that? That was my plan. I must hunt soon. Greetings. You thought of
Research complete!
Agreed. You thought of that? That was my plan.
We're under attack!
What, mortal? Death rages.
Our allied hero has been slain!
You thought of that? Agreed. That was my plan. That was my plan. Agreed. Very well. That was my
Your
plan.
man.
Very well. I must hunt soon. That
We're
was
under
my plan.
attack!
Very well. I hunger. You thought of that? That was my plan. Very well.
We're under attack!
What is it now? Greetings. What is it now? That was my plan. You thought of that? That was my plan. I must hunt soon. Very well. That was my plan. Greetings. You thought of that? Death rages. What is it now? You thought of that? Very well. Agreed. Very well. You thought of that? Very well. That was my plan. Agreed. That was my plan. Your soul is mine.
Your man.
You thought of
Our
that?
allied hero has been slain!
Very well. You thought of that? Agreed. That was my plan. What? You thought of that? That was my plan. Very well. That was my plan. I must hunt soon. What is it now? I must hunt soon. Greetings. Agreed. Die. That was my plan. Very well. I hunger. That was my plan. I must hunt soon. Die. Very well. Agreed. Your soul is mine. That was my plan. That was my plan. Agreed. That was my plan. Very well. That was my plan. You thought of that? That was my plan. You thought of that? Die. That was my plan. Agreed. Very well. You thought of that? What is it now? That was my plan. Agreed. You thought of that? That was my plan. Death rages. Very well. Agreed. You thought of that? Very well. Agreed.
Our outlying town is being attacked!
My plan. I hunger. You thought of that? I must hunt soon. Death rages. I hunger. Death rages. Death rages. That was my plan. Die. I hunger. Very well. Your soul is mine. Indeed. You thought of that. Very well. You thought of that. That was my plan. Very well. Agreed. That was my plan. That was my plan. That was my plan. That was my plan. God.
We're under attack!
What
Research complete.
death rages. That was my plan. I hunger. Greed. Death rages. Very well. That was my plan.